Westerns aren't dead, but you wouldn't know it with how these films got buried. Clint Eastwood smuggling a kid across Mexico, Kevin Costner hunting down a stolen grandson, and Nicolas Cage on a buffalo hunt. These movies deserved better, and it's time they got their due. Macho has Clint Eastwood playing an aging rodeo star sent to Mexico to pull a kid out of a bad situation. The reception was all over the place. Some liked it, others thought the script dragged, and a few even said Eastwood himself felt off. But for all the criticism, the cinematography is solid, and the whole thing has that slow, reflective tone that fits Eastwood's late-career vibe. It's not the good, the bad, and the ugly, not even close, but it's still a decent watch. Underrated, sure. A masterpiece? Not really. But Eastwood in a Western is always worth a look. Tom Hanks stepping into a Western, with Paul Greengrass behind the camera. News of the World follows Captain Jefferson Kidd, a Civil War vet trying to get a young girl back to her family. It's got that classic Western journey structure, danger on the road, quiet moments, and a bond forming between two strangers. Critics loved it. Sitting at 88% on Rotten Tomatoes, and yeah, Hanks carries the whole thing. Greengrass dials it down here, none of the frantic energy from Bloody Sunday or United 93. But it works. Nothing groundbreaking, but a strong, steady Western that delivers exactly what it promises. A Western built around stealing milk from a cow does not sound like the most gripping premise. But First Cow turns that into 2 hours of pure cinema. Set in 1800s Oregon, it follows two men secretly milking the only cow in town to bake and sell biscuits until their scheme falls apart. Critics loved it. The film debuted at Telluride, hit theaters in 2020, and immediately got showered with praise. Easily one of the best Westerns of the decade. Also, maybe the best cow movie of the decade. Tough competition out there. Another modern Western tackling big themes. No Man's Land follows a young fugitive running from the law after a vigilante border patrol goes horribly wrong. Jake Allen leads, with Frank Grillo playing his father, and the whole thing leans into redemption, guilt, and a bit of social commentary. It's got its moments. Some parts hit hard, some feel like the usual modern Western formula, but it's a solid film that deserved more attention. The premise had the potential for something bigger, but even as is, it's a well-paced, thoughtful take on the genre. Not perfect, but definitely overlooked. Outlaws, a train heist, and a town full of witches. The Pale Door goes all in on Western horror, but the execution is not quite there. The setup is solid. Bank robbers stumble into a coven and get way more than they bargained for. But with a low budget and a cast of mostly unfamiliar faces, it never fully cashes in on its own premise. Critics weren't impressed, mostly calling it a missed opportunity. That said, if you can look past some shaky writing and pacing issues, there's still plenty of fun to be had. The cast does solid work. The practical effects on the witches are surprisingly strong for a movie working with very limited resources, and it leans into that B-movie charm just enough to stay entertaining. Kevin Costner and Diane Lane in a revenge-driven neo-Western. Let Him Go takes place in the 1960s in North Dakota, following a former sheriff and his wife trying to save their grandson from a dangerous off-the-grid family. This one flew under the radar, but it's easily one of the best neo-Westerns in recent years. Costner and Lane are phenomenal, but it's Leslie Manville who steals the show as Blanche, a villain so perfectly deranged, she makes every scene 10 times more tense. Tim Blake Nelson leading a Western just makes sense. Old Henry sticks to a classic setup, an aging farmer, his son, and a gang of outlaws looking for trouble. But it's all in the execution. Shot on a $1.5 million budget, and somehow it delivers more grit and intensity than plenty of bigger budget Westerns from the same year. Nelson himself had one rule for this movie: no gun spinning. He didn't want comparisons to the Ballad of Buster Scruggs, and this is about as far from Scruggs as it gets. Old Henry doesn't just pay tribute to Western classics, it understands them. The pacing, the atmosphere, the tension. It all builds to one hell of a final act. A Western starring Christoph Waltz, Willem Dafoe, and Rachel Brosnahan should have been a big deal. On paper, Dead for a Dollar had everything going for it. Big names, a solid premise, and Walter Hill in the director's chair, a bounty hunter tracking down a businessman's wife after she's supposedly kidnapped by an army deserter. Sounds like classic Western thriller territory. But somehow, it never quite clicked. Mixed reviews, barely any buzz, and just kind of came and went without making much noise. That said, Hill knows how to make a Western, and even if this one plays it safe, there's still plenty to enjoy. Nicolas Cage, Buffalo Hunting, The Frontier. Butcher's Crossing is a brutal survival Western, built around a simple but effective premise. An ambitious young man joins a buffalo hunt, only to realize that nature doesn't care about his plans. Cage plays Miller, the grizzled frontiersman leading the charge, and yeah, he absolutely owns the role. The movie doesn't reinvent anything, but it doesn't have to. Looks gorgeous, feels grim, and delivers exactly what it promises. A stylish, blood-soaked revenge Western with a killer soundtrack. The Harder They Fall has everything. Sharp writing, bold visuals, and an ensemble cast that does not miss. But as of 2025, the movie's stuck with an unfortunate footnote, the Jonathan Majors controversy. Not exactly the legacy it deserved. Still, the movie stands on its own. The action is electric, the cinematography is top tier, and the performances are next level. Idris Elba in particular steals the show as Rufus Buck, one of the most menacing Western villains in years.